Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Logistics Executive TV. I'm very pleased today to introduce a gentleman that we've spoken to before, and is always good to get an update on what is happening right across the world in supply chain. My dear friend, Dr. John Gattorna, is a supply chain thought leader. He has written more books than I care to remember having read. He's a member of the Supply Chain 50 Special Advisory Board. He's an adjunct professor. He's a speaker and world-renowned thought leader on supply chain in every continent of the world that I know. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kim, and thanks for those kind words. I have to live up to them now.
Now I understand that you have just returned to Australia. You've been running again the thought leadership series of retreats, which you've been doing now for, well over a decade that I'm aware of, and the last one I attended was probably in Singapore some years ago. What's been happening there, John? Where have you been?
Okay, well, very quickly, the series that was laid down for 2020 didn't happen, as you know. COVID got in the way. So we've just finished that series now. We've been, in the last 6 months, we've been to Europe, where we went to Amsterdam, Hamburg, and Basel in Switzerland. We've been to Singapore, which took in the Asia situation, San Francisco on the west coast of the USA, and we've just come back from South Africa, where we've been really been talking to a lot of African executives. The whole idea of the series is really to disseminate the information that we've been picking up in our research, Kim. As you know, being an engineer, I'm a pretty applied sort of guy, even though I do work in the academic sphere from time to time. I like to go out and work inside companies, and we've been doing some terrific work with a number of global companies in depth. And what I mean by in depth, we've been working with some of them for up to 10 years. So we've been getting deeper and deeper into them. And this sort of acts as our laboratory. And out of that, we learn a lot. And we put that together and then publish a book or two, and then move off into the world and disseminate that information and see how people react to it. So we've just really finished the 2020 series in 23.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess the last time you and I spoke was we were right in the first year of COVID, and the world and the supply chain was a very different place then. And of course, we've all moved on. What are some of the key issues that you've been talking about with your colleagues, with your clients at these events, and what are some of the things that you're working on with your team at Gattorna Alignment at the moment?
Okay, well, really, COVID in a way was a wake-up call. The world was continuing down this globalization route. We had companies going further and further to buy product or components from single sources. It was almost as if there was no end to the sort of world we lived in post the GFC. So we had, 10 pretty good years following GFC. We recovered and it went beyond that. What COVID sort of showed us, and it certainly was a wake-up call to many governments around the world as well as companies, is that you just can't go on forever like this. You have to think about how to handle disruptions. And on that point, our first big finding, if you like, and post-COVID, is that we are now in what we call a two-tier world of different volatilities. We've got our basic business as usual level of volatility, which in itself is a lot more than 10 years ago. We're seeing volatility on both the supply side and demand side, plus or minus 40% variation. But on top of that, we're getting up to 100% variation for extreme volatility, which comes along from time to time. So I suppose our preoccupation has been, how do we cope with the ongoing volatility in business as usual, and how do we prepare for the type of extreme volatility that's going to happen from time to time? So many governments and so many companies have been caught out if not through a plague or a virus, through floods. I mean, we've seen the floods that have gone on in Australia. We've seen, Perth cut off from the rest of Australia when all their railway lines got washed out for 2 or 3 weeks. We've had bushfires. So it's not just viruses. There's earthquakes, there's natural occurrences, and there's man-made things like crypto crime, etc. So I suppose the major preoccupation we have at the moment is how do we build in resilience going forward, and what does that mean? And without actually building the cost structures to make us uncompetitive. That's the main thrust. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm aware a number of your clients are genuinely global behemoths with hundreds, if not thousands, of centers and they're in the manufacturing space and in the retail space. So thousands of points of supply and procurement around the world in particular. And I know you've been working with a number of those in regards to solving the conundrum of maintaining supply as the tensions of the various factors that you just mentioned, and especially in Australia, where we've seen some extremely dramatic natural occurrences occur in nature that's disrupted supply chains. What are some of the lessons that are now coming out of some of the examples that you've been working with and some of the material I know you're putting together for your next book?
Look, the basic fundamental principles that we've been working on and developing for the last 35, 40 years, actually, to tell you the truth, since the late 70s, the idea of alignment still applies. And we use that as our guiding influence. But we're putting a much finer point these days. Let's assume that there are a number of companies out there that have understood the need to better understand the buying behaviours of their customers and their suppliers, the expectations of suppliers as well, and that we need to study the behavioural influences in our supply chains, including culture inside our businesses and what drives the different supply chains. But leaving all that aside is almost a given. What we are now looking at much more is things like digitization. We really think that if a company, a $1 billion company, hasn't really got its digitization program underway now, boy, they're really on the back foot. And the only thing that's going to save them probably would be to go to someone like a Kuehne Nagel or someone like that, 4PL, to come in with the technology to bridge over a period while they're getting their act together. But essentially, what we're thinking today is the name of the game. However you achieve it is, you could almost sum it up in 3 words: fast decision making. The faster we can make decisions, the faster we can see what's happening in our supply chains, both on the supply side and on the demand side. Take a view of it, and actually, in the case of our customer order that's running late or has been interrupted, we can push an alert out to our customer 2 or 3 days earlier than they would have otherwise heard about it, so they can organize themselves. And we're finding that companies that are doing this, the customer satisfaction has gone up tremendously, which in turn has a positive influence on revenue as well. So really it's down to ultimately about data, and how can we align our processes and our data streams inside our business initially at the transactional level, or what we call the execution level, so that, and I think I've mentioned to you before, the idea of the control tower. A number of our clients have got them now. Unilever's got them. Schneider Electric's got 7 control towers, all interlinked around the world, and sort of with a headquarters based in Budapest in Europe. And the feedback on these control towers is exactly as we forecast. That is, by having a group of people from various functions in the business co-located, sitting in a control room where they've got a bank of screens showing them what's happening with the progress of orders, both on the inbound side and on the outbound side, and making quick decisions as to when we get exceptions is really helping the performance of the supply chain. So much so that companies that hitherto just thought of logistics as a sort of a transport function now understand. I think commercial functions are now coming and saying, hey, we really value this control tower function and the collaboration between supply chain and ourselves in getting the job done for our customers. So it's really in this area that we're working, because we think that if you can get the transactional data right, which means it's pretty continuous and you've got visibility and you can make decisions, then you can start to aggregate that data up to operational level where you might use it for planning, or even to the technical level where you might run models and run scenarios, or even to the strategic level, which every 5 years you might review your infrastructure and fit for purpose. And is it globally or regionally fit for purpose given the way the markets are shifting? So it's a really a bottom-up sort of way of doing things, but it has to have a top-down vision, Kim.
Sure. And I guess, John, that raises the issue of if you look at digitization, and it's a major force across, as you say, successful businesses. There's some great examples, not so great, but some clear examples where in Australia, for example, recently, one of the largest transport organisations has gone into receivership there. Massive organisation in the cold chain. Reading on the weekend on the Financial Review that, one of the contributing factors of that, maybe not the only contributing factor, was its failure to effectively digitise and to integrate the various organisations from a digital perspective. So, I mean, some classic examples there.
Oh, yeah. Look, and look, that company's probably spent a lot of money on various freestanding transactional systems like ERP systems, etc. But that's no guarantee that you're going to, get them all linked up. And that's been the problem right from the start. If you look at the failure of Toll going back, they grew through acquisition of many different companies, and for a long time they were the darling of the stock exchange because they were running these businesses quite separately. But come the day when they started to try and integrate them, that's when they started to get into some real trouble. Look, I think the only way out of this, Kim, and I've thought a lot about it, is that we can't throw out all our sunk costs in our legacy systems. But at the same token, I don't think we're ever going to get our legacy systems to talk to each other on their own, so, if you like. So really, I think the new breed of middleware, or let's call it the integration layer, is the way to go. And there are companies now emerging, companies like Era Technology in the last 4 or 5 years have been concentrating on this area. They're not just supply chain company. They're there to help companies solve all sorts of problems. It could be a pricing problem. It could be anything. But supply chain is omnipresent really in our world. So they're pretty much a priority. And the idea there is that you've got a layer that sits across the top of all your legacy systems, sucks the data up into the layer, and then they have crawlers that will go through and pick out the data you want, whether it be for running, at the execution level, a control tower, or indeed it might be for planning purposes. And I think going forward, we're at the very early stages here. And if you think about a control tower in an airport sense, it's a monitoring device, but that's the whole idea. We're monitoring what's going on, all the flows, and we then are drawn to what the exceptions are, where the exceptions are. And there could be thousands of transactions in any company in a day, but we want to know what the 200 exceptions are so we can fix those. And in some cases, there's more than 200. There's thousands of decisions that managers could make in a given day, which some of them might only be worth $200. You know what I mean? So we've been for years missing out on these decisions. We've been trying to find where the big ones are. With this new technology, as we develop it, it goes beyond a descriptive to where managers have to look at the data and make a decision to embedding it with rules, business rules, which then allow us to apply artificial intelligence, which then starts to take care of a lot of the everyday decisions. We call it sweeping up the crumbs, we can sweep up a lot of those crumbs that we would have otherwise missed and start making some money that way. And at the same time, bring forward recommendations on some of the very big decisions which management can then focus on. So I don't think we're going to get to completely autonomous supply chains decision-making going forward for a long time. And maybe that we never want to get there if you've just watched the recent film again, the HAL computer in, 2001 Odyssey, and I'm just wondering whether that's a good idea.
Still relevant.
But, yeah, still relevant. I was on a plane somewhere, and I think it was a Qantas plane that came up again. But look, but even if it can take us some of that way to relieve managers of everyday repetitive decisions which sweep up a lot of the smaller money-saving decisions and allow us to focus on some of the bigger decisions, that will be a big step forward, and I'm sure it's going to make a big difference to customer satisfaction.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. I mean, just drawing back on your point about decision-making, the need, whether it's autonomous or it's human decision-making, the need for pace in decision-making. And I know as part of your thought leadership retreats, there's always discussion around talent, the need for enhanced level of capability and capacity of talent and where talent is coming from. As we wrap up, where do you see any particular sources of, I live in the world of talent, have done for 25 years in supply chain, and where do you see the sources of talent coming from supply chain? I mean, you're heavily involved in many institutions around the world, from the UK to Australia and Europe. Where do you think companies should be looking for the next layer of talent to be able to make decisions quickly, to be able to drive productivity and success in businesses?
Look, it's as you know from your knowledge of Myers-Briggs, not everyone wants to make quick decisions, but the other people who want to do things more slowly and do them in groups and so on, there's still a place for them in supply chains, because we do have supply chains out there at the moment where we have collaborative customers who want to come and sit down and discuss things and talk about their forecasts and things, and that's when we need people like that. But I think more and more, as you intimated, we need people who are prepared to take individual risk to make decisions, and sometimes in extreme cases make the decision and ask for forgiveness afterwards, when we get into extreme cases. The equivalent of the, SAS, where, in a business sense, where you just can't have a committee meeting. Look, universities, I think, have got to really relook at themselves. I look around the world. I mean, SP Jain, I'm, pretty much associated with that group based out of Dubai and India and Singapore and Sydney. They're certainly addressing this. They understand that. I think a lot of the sort of standard universities are running the odd course on supply chain, but it's not enough. I think what we're going to have to do is, I think companies are going to have to step up, Kim, and do a lot more in-house sort of, almost call it, what would you call it, apprenticeship type thing.
Coaching as well. Yeah,
coaching
specialist coaches.
I honestly think the scale of that's needed going forward is not going to be satisfied by our traditional educational institutions, even at the best of times. I think that companies are going to have to start, rather than standing back and picking the best out of the universities, they're going to have to start taking up almost like an in-house university approach. And people like, I think, Accenture know that, because at a company that's got several 100,000 people, they're probably turning over 50 or 60,000 a year. That's probably 150 or 300,000 interviews. You know what the ratios are. They're soaking up a company like that, soaking up enormous intellectual, horsepower. So I think we're going to have to do that, and we're going to have to be a lot more targeted at the type of, not just looking at the skills of people technically, but looking at them from the mindset point of view, so that when we bring them in, they are ready to make quick decisions and not uncomfortable about that. That's a new sort of part of the world for them, I think.
Well, you're always on the front of the curve, John. You're always asking questions. I know in your retreats, you're always asking a lot of tough questions of the folks that attend. It's great that you also have a lot of young people come along as well as guests at those events. So we look forward for publishing the next round next year or so, and the next book coming out. As we wrap, you know, I always like to ask our guests if they can give our audience one or two tips on what they should be thinking about for business success moving forward in the logistics and the supply chain world. Off the top of your head, what would be one or two things that leaders should be thinking about moving forward to deal with what looks like going to be as dynamic and a challenging year as we've had for some time?
Yep. I think two things. Any self-respecting billion-dollar-plus company now has to have two internal capabilities. And I sold this idea to Annette Clayton 10 years ago when she first joined Schneider Electric, and she listened, and now that's put them in a great place. And that is they really need to take on board data analytics type capability in-house, because we are awash with data, but we're not using it. And we need, a critical mass of young people who are literally culling through data every day, every minute of the day. So that's one thing. It's a capability. And interestingly, there's lots of patterns that appear in data which could help us run our supply chains. Using coefficient of variation, we can almost see which customers are lean and offer us a pretty sort of predictable demand. And we can see those other customers who are creating sort of opportunistic sort of twists and so on and surges in demand. So, the data thing is terrific. And then the second thing is, I honestly believe going forward we need we've had modeling on our it's been around for 30 or 40 years. We've now got the capacity to build internal groups who can not only just build models for like consultants do and for a one-off solution, but actually can use these models tactically. To give you an idea, I had a group in South Africa contact me during COVID, and they one of the world's largest producers of blueberries. And, during COVID, the blueberries were still growing. The supply was coming out.
Nobody to pick them.
That's right. And and when they got them picked, they had no idea whether the half a dozen UK retail chains would buy them, what the other European retailers would do. Their standard forecasting methodologies, in the box stuff are just not useful. And so the thing we've been preaching to them and others is be model ready. And that means it links well with the first point I made, because if you've got your data in shape, you can build models which you can then run either at the strategic level or more importantly, you can run them at the tactical level to say, well, for the next season of blueberries, let's run some scenarios and see what we think might be possible, and then make a decision on it. Your management have to make a decision on it. So those two tools or capabilities, I think, are going to be key going forward, Tim.
Right. Thanks, John. I really appreciate your input and your thoughts. By all means, I look forward to staying in touch. Going to be in Sydney in the next few months, so definitely look forward to catching up with your beautiful office overlooking the Harbour Bridge and having a lunch with you. So Dr. John Gattorna, Gattorna Alignment, global thought leader, speaker, publisher, and generally fantastic person in the industry. Really appreciate your thoughts and your assistance today.
Thanks,
Thanks, John, and thanks everybody for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again on Logistics Executive TV.